we'll kick off by me reading a poem. It's a poem that came to my notice and was probably written around the time that I decided to initiate the series of conversations. And it's called Homecoming. It's written by a dear friend of mine, and I know of Wendy and Amanda too, called Mary Walker, who has given her blessing for us to utilize this poem. And we'll use it just as a way of also bringing ourselves, centering ourselves and grounding ourselves in this conversation. So without any ado, I'll go ahead and read the poem. Homecoming. After a long time unmoored, living alongside rather than in yourself. On seeing this and feeling suddenly homesick for something you didn't know existed. Peace. You might long to rush at yourself, dive headlong into the safety of home, and wonder why you keep missing. Wonder why you and your life keep floating away from each other. Knowing that the anchor was thrown too far from the boat all that time ago. Reunion can't come soon enough. Still, it takes time to reacquaint, time to trust the tide that was always trying to take you home, and that will pick you up and return you yet. So that's our poem on home and the series of conversations called Coming Home. And so welcome. Whatever home may mean to you, we're going to find out and see if there's something that connects us through this understanding of what home is. And so I'm going to go ahead and introduce our studio audience today, our guests, Masima, Amanda, and Kate. And by way of introduction, say a little bit about you. Kate, I've known you for the longest here of the group of ladies here. Kate and I studied a leadership program through CTI in Barcelona, a year-long leadership program about just over 5 years ago now. And whilst we haven't had a conversation in some time now, we've certainly had a strong connection. We also encountered each other in Peru at the wedding of a dear friend of both of us. So that gave us an opportunity to deepen our connection as well in a completely different space, in a different continent. But aside from that, we haven't met in person on either of our home continents. And Masima, I've only recently met, actually only a week ago, and that really excites me because it just goes to show how perhaps we don't even need time and space to know that we have connection with certain people, that there is resonance. And so I'm very thankful to you, Masima, for joining us, for having the courage to join in a group of completely strange women in some ways. And the beauty of it and what shows that there is a connection is just a day or two ago, Masima pointed out to me that in fact, our businesses carry the same name, which is Makeda, and that is Queen of Africa. If that isn't synchronicity or reason enough to know that there is a connection, well, I don't know. It's not a common name. And Amanda, also, as with Wendy, who I'll introduce just now, we met through a writing program called Write into Light, led by Martha Beck approximately 3 years ago. And we form part of a community that chose to stay together. We're Facebook friends and often see each other there just about every day or every couple of days. And Amanda is from New Zealand. She's not there right now, but I'll let her introduce herself in that regard. And I'm just so grateful for you agreeing to be here as well today, Amanda. Thank you. And so, yeah, I'd like to ask Massima, Amanda, Kate, the three of you to introduce yourselves. Perhaps Amanda, you'd like to start just by way of telling us whereabout in the world you're situated. Not that I even know specifically where some of you are. Kate, I'm not even sure where you are now. And also let us know something about yourselves that might be of interest for us to know, something interesting about yourselves.
Hi everyone. Hi, and thank you for that lovely welcome, Guiomar. It's wonderful to be here and to see you all, and some familiar faces and some new faces. So it's lovely. I'm currently living in Amsterdam in the Netherlands, and I'm actually from Australia, but we often get put together. That's okay. So I'm born in Brisbane, grew up in Brisbane in Australia, and but I am living in Amsterdam. Like I said, I'm married to a Dutch man, and I have a 13-year-old daughter. So I find this topic of coming home is so resonant for me, because I think I've spent the last 25 years yo-yoing between Europe and Australia, mainly because of the relationship I'm in, but also because I've always had a yearning to kind of travel. So yeah, I'm sort of a long way from home in one regard, and I think the last year I felt quite a strong longing to investigate or think about where home really is for me. And I'm a writer at the moment, so I write poetry and various other, maybe essays, smaller, shorter pieces of writing. So I'm really enjoying writing as a means to investigate all sorts of things about coming home to myself, and whatever seems to sort of pique my curiosity at any one moment. So this is perfect. It's lovely to be here. Yeah, thank you.
Wonderful, and welcome.
Thanks, you. Amanda.
Massima, would you like to go ahead and introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Massima Mahumola. I am based in Johannesburg, South Africa. I have 3 daughters, 18, 16, and 13, and currently transitioning out of a marriage. I've spent the last 2 years really going within myself and really trying to understand who am I, what am I, and it's just been such a beautiful journey, which has led me back home, realizing that I've always been here and that I am the purpose. So that's my little story. So what I'm interested in doing going forward is really just trying to ground into what it is that I'd like to explore further in terms of giving back to community, giving back to the broader society, the purpose that I am. So I am kind of in between. I'd say I'm trying to figure out what it is that I need to be doing. Things are slowly coming up for me all the time. I'm having great insights, great ideas all the time. And the right partnerships and the right people are showing up for me. So I'm looking forward to contributing towards, humanity as a whole, and just living a purposeful life, being the purpose that I am. And for me, home is peace. I find that with everything that I've been experiencing the last couple of months, and all the transitions of not working and transitioning out of marriage, I've just got this inner peace internally. Like, I've just got so much peace within, and that is my home for me. But anyway, thank you, everybody, and I'm looking forward to the conversation.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you, Massima. Just a really big welcome to you, and I'm glad that we found you, or that I found you at least. Yeah. Kate.
Hello, everybody who is here live, and for those of you who are watching. I live in the Northeast of the United States in a state called Vermont, which is very appropriate because Vermont means green mountains. And I am a nature girl and have integrated nature into my life and my work always. And this notion of home is very interesting to me, as I used to be primarily a leadership development coach. I am now in retirement and really looking at land conservation as my legacy. And home for me right now is Vermont, and it is also traveling around the country in a 15-foot trailer, which is the equivalent of about 4 meters. And I travel around the country with my husband and my dog, just seeing the beauty of this world. And included in that beauty is meeting people who are so different than me, have very different ideologies. And I'm finding that my purpose is really about deep listening, is really being so open to the different experiences and the different voices. And I think that's very pertinent to our conversation today and our conversations when we leave this particular conversation and have more as we move about the world. So thank you, Guiomar, for bringing us all together. And I mean, again, the 5 of us here, and then the multitudes that this will ripple out to. So thank you for including me.
Beautiful. Thank you, Kate. And I just love this notion of deep listening, and it's something that struck me around you just a few months ago, something I read, and I immediately noted I need to make contact with Kate again. So wonderful that. I'm looking forward to, in due course, also hearing about your notion of deep listening and your experience of it as well. So thank you. So yeah, thank you, everyone. And from here, I'll go ahead and do a little bit of an introduction on Wendy, who I know I've known, like Amanda, since we were also, Wendy, I also met through my program of Write into Light. And Wendy, although I know she's not writing prolifically now, is also a writer, because I've read some of her amazing things that she's written in time, but I think her life at the moment is not in a place where she's writing at this very moment. But what drew me to inviting Wendy to this conversation in the place of an interview around coming home is that Wendy is someone who I experienced as more deeply exploring that notion of home. And I think particularly, and maybe not consciously, but if we look at home in a way, in a sense, as a heartfelt thing, Wendy, particularly I think in the last year where I know, Wendy, you've experienced quite a lot of changes and almost traumatic loss in a sense in your life. You've done a deep examination in a way of what home is. And so Wendy herself describes herself as a seeker, a bohemian, and I'm thinking back to the times I've seen you with different colors in your hair, which has just been so gorgeous and beautiful when you say the word bohemian. And we've had an in-depth conversation leading into this conversation around what home is, and it's actually, for me, quite astonishing the depth of understanding and knowing that Wendy has around this topic of home. So Wendy lives currently in Southern California, and she hails from Colorado, though, not that I know the US that well myself, so she'll be able to introduce you more in that sense. And yeah, I'm not going to say too much more because, Wendy, I'm going to ask you to do a brief introduction. I'm going to ask everyone to switch off their cameras now and go on to mute and to do a brief introduction of yourself, although it's quite extensive, as I said, what we could go into.
Oh boy. I was born in Boulder, Colorado. My parents were in college at the time, and my dad, who got his degree in chemical engineering and math, wanted to go back to farming, which is what he was raised with. So I was actually raised in a very small town called Yuma, Colorado. It's up in the northeastern corner of Colorado. And from there, went to college in Colorado, but then shortly thereafter moved to California. So I have moved around a bit. And I had, since I was in 7th grade, a passion to be an architect, but I wound up, even though I graduated from college with a degree in fine arts and design, I ended up moving to California and working in a mortgage company. Ultimately started in real estate, but had my own business and sold it in 2004, met and married a man. Well, I met and married a man right in Colorado, married him and then divorced him when I was 30. So most of you might can relate to going through divorce. It's challenging. Fortunately, I did not have children. And then later, after I'd started my business and was really enjoying being single, I met a man with 4 children and ended up marrying him. So that is where my life is presently. And at this moment, I'm sitting in the basement of my mom's home in Colorado, here for some work and just really thrilled to be here with all of you. So thank you, Guiomar, for inviting me. And yes, I feel quite ordinary, but yeah, when I look back at my life and reflections, I think we all have extraordinary lives if we take the time to pause and look where we've been and where we're going, but especially to be in the present, which I think is so important.
Yeah. Well, Wendy, again, thank you for being here in this conversation. And I'm going to be asking you what home means, and I know it means a lot of different things to you, and what I'm also going to be sharing a little bit around what stood out for me around some of the other conversations we've had. And one of the things that struck me is how I know you're based in California at the moment, and you're also building or developing a new property that's also going to be home. You have homes in Colorado as well. And what struck me was how you navigate East and West, essentially, because from our conversations, that's what I've understood, is that you've lived in East and West. And I don't know, for me, there's something quite significant and deep around this notion of navigating both East and West, even if we look at it in terms of the world. And, you know, the Eastern philosophy and the Western way of life and the Western philosophy. I know that's taking it into a bit of an abstract realm. But yeah, I mean, how does that sit with you, that notion?
Well, first, I think Colorado's in the middle of the state, but it's considered the West in some ways. So we're in the middle of the United States, and then California is, of course, further west. And you know, it's interesting. I've really not spent much time in the eastern part of the United States. I have just a couple of times, but I love travel, as you know. South Africa calls to my heart. I love exploring Europe. I've been fortunate to be able to travel different places, which I think is so important to our understanding of the larger world and really ultimately of ourselves. Travel really makes us to explore beyond just the landscapes and really into our souls and hearts.
And quite rightly, I forgot in my introduction to say that Wendy's also been to South Africa a couple of times, or a few times, several times, I don't even know how many. And we had the privilege of meeting briefly in the airport while she was on her travels through the country. But I know you're extensively traveled. So apologies for my saying that you and for my lack of knowledge around the geography of the US. But obviously there was something in that for me, because that's a resonance that you bring to me, that you somehow hold something quite expansive, which straddles both East and West, even if not so fully in your physical geography at the moment.
Well, I've definitely been getting rid of, or casting off some of the Western ideology, I think, that is so prevalent in, you know, the global community today. And certainly the United States seems to be up there with, you know, its views tend to shape a lot of the world. And for being a relatively new country, I think that's a little backwards at times. And yeah, I've always had a just longing to be in Africa. And so the first time I had the gift of being there, actually it was the second time that we met, but the first time was I think 2016, and that was with Martha Beck at her star retreat. And that was truly just, I would say, almost the pinnacle of my dreams and desires, was to be in Africa and with the animals. And like Kate mentioned, I have a deep heart and soul with connecting with nature and animals. And arguably my dogs have probably taught me the most in life about the essence of life and kind of what home means. You know, earlier in our conversations, Guiomar, you know, kind of had asked about what coming home or what home looks like. And it really made me think that home is less of a place than a sense of, and then Mary Walker so perfectly named it, and it just gave me chills as you read her poem again, to hear it again, peace, you know, where we find peace. And then Mosima, you know, mentioned that as well, that peace, that's where I think we find home. And I think if more of us can strive towards peace, and presently the world is challenged in that regard, but I think that's where we will all come home, to peace. And that's more of an Eastern philosophy than a Western. So back to your original question.
Yeah.
I think that's something that we have to integrate into the Western philosophies.
And Wendy, just in terms of, you know, you at the moment establishing the secondary home. I mean, I know you have apartments in Colorado, but you're establishing a cabin there at the moment, which is part of your greater dream and vision, what's becoming that, part of your greater vision. And how does that tie into your vision for yourself of home?
Good question. I think, you know, throughout living organisms, we've all had some sort of nesting instinct. And whether it's a shell or a cave or a nest, we seek to find places where we can, you know, retreat from the outer world. And I have been always, as I mentioned, wanting to be an architect. I've always been intrigued and enamored of beautiful spaces and functional spaces. I think beauty kind of follows the functionary forms first. You know, we need a place that's safe, that's comfortable. And so to make a space that is that and that speaks to us. And in this world, we travel now with much more since we've become agrarian. We, you know, have settled in places. And so with that comes things. And I'm more attached to the sentimental things. But yet, you know, we live in a material world. But I'm kind of at that cusp in my passing my mid-50s now, where I want to shed things and be more present with space. And so what appeals to me about this cabin in Colorado is it's on 3 acres. It has a stream or a river that comes through it, a very small river, but it's still beautiful. And it's right against the national forest. And there are wild animals, fox, moose, bear, all sorts of things, little chipmunks that are really cute. And I long to be in nature. I find that to be more stimulating than large cities, even though I love to visit large cities and meet the people there. But for me, I have to be near nature. And I think that really speaks to my sense of my soul's home too, is just being with nature. So the cabin is a space where I hope to do that. And another part of that is that I truly hope to have it as a sanctuary to host and facilitate retreats for people. And whether it's a yoga class, a cooking class, you know, a soul class, just something where amazing women such as yourselves can come enjoy being in nature, resonating with other people that might have common interests, or learning something completely new and different. And so to have a space that might facilitate that really is a little dream that I'm incubating at the moment. I'm not sure how it's going to come to being, but it's something I'm holding very dear to my heart.
That's amazing. You've only brought that. I've only known about that in the last week or so that we've been speaking a bit more, but it feels as though already that seed is germinating within you, that possibility. I know you've spoken about as well the we haven't gone into your history that much, but where you came from a couple of years ago, you were living in a very big house where you brought up your 4 stepsons as well with your husband. And in some ways, it sounds as though the last few years you've perhaps been in that space of not necessarily, while you've been living in a more apartment style living, not necessarily having a home, which means to you more the outdoors, the outdoor aspect of your dwelling. So while you have the dwelling, I think what surrounds you beyond that is what is more important to you in terms of calling it home.
So true. Growing up in a very small town, as I mentioned earlier, it only had 2,500 people. It was primarily farming and ranching. So we lived in town, which was literally just a 2-mile square gridded community, very simplistic. And then, of course, many people lived out on their farms further away. But it was a safe place to grow up. I mean, it was a place where you didn't lock your doors. We didn't even have a key to our house. We never took our keys out of the ignition of our cars. You would just, drive and park. You'd have windows down. Your purse would be in the seat. So to have grown up in that relative safety, it just kind of befuddles me now that I've lived in cities where, you lock everything up and protect your things. Because there you would wander over to a neighbor's house and go in and get a cup of sugar. I mean, there's stories of that I literally lived that type of life. And yet even there, I had a father who was a tough, critical alcoholic. So I think outdoors was my retreat and my safe place. So less so than the actual physical home. And there was a grove of unkept apple trees that was in our back lot. And I would kind of hide out in there, or I would climb up I loved climbing trees. I would climb up onto the roof of our house, and there were some overhanging rafters that I would kind of tuck under and sit up there and contemplate the world. So I think nature and the sky, even a trampoline, I would lay on our trampoline and just watch the contrails of planes as they would pass over and look at shapes of clouds and just, wonder where my life would someday take me. And I don't think I ever would have imagined then where I am today. Maybe I did dream of a cabin, so perhaps there is a full circle there. But yeah, since moving to California and when I met and married my husband, and when Guiomar and I were talking the other day, it was really a revelation, probably just in the last year or so, that home was the home I actually lived in the longest of any home in my life. And yet it really never felt like my home. My husband built it with his former wife. It was a very big, grand home. Which just felt too enormous for me. And yet, knowing that the boys had gone through a divorce, I wanted them to have, something that they felt safe in and familiar with. So I didn't want to say, oh, let's sell and uproot and go somewhere else. So I spent from 2001 to 2018 when we finally sold it. And my husband and I downsized drastically to a townhome in Orange County, California. And it's only a 2-bedroom home. So we put a bunch of stuff in storage. We were wandering around. We didn't even know what we were going to do first. We rented for a bit. And so the whole notion of home just really started to become uprooted for me. And I really had to contemplate what home means. And I think it's a profound concept to consider, because I think most humans think of their dwelling as their home or perhaps their birthplace. Amanda alluded to, Australia, and I totally get that sense of home, because I do feel Colorado and the mountains pull my heart here. But yet I travel and I find amazing places that I'm just completely enamored with and want to explore further. And then when you meet people which have completely different cultures, different ways of thoughts, different ways of living, yet you find commonalities and you realize that, we're all here sharing a planet, and that's a beautiful thing. So connecting with others, makes me realize that home is really wherever we are in our heart and soul.
It's beautiful, Wendy, and you're bringing up that notion of storage. And it's had me thinking, since I've heard you bring it up, around how much do we store and how much do we hang on to, be it in physical form or emotions or memories, or we cling to, and that I don't know, maybe in some ways keep us from moving forward. And I think that applies to many of us. Particularly, you spoke as well of how one of the things that struck you, and it was a particularly tender and emotional moment in our conversation, I noticed around how when you'd come to Africa and you'd been around some of the poorer communities, what struck you most was how little these people had, and yet how much they had at the same time.
So true. My first time in Africa, we initially flew into Zambia, and seeing Victoria Falls is just magnificent. Truly a wonder of the world. But then we took an excursion out to a rural village, and this was a place where people were living, with dirt floors. I mean, some didn't even have walls. Animals were mingling with the people, and yet they were just beaming broad smiles. They were content. There was a water well that only worked when the electricity worked. So they'd have their, big gallons of containers lined up to, be able to get their water for their needs for that day. And it just struck me, especially coming from this large home in California, and LA is just, just crazy. It's very stereotypical of its descriptions in many places. It was beautiful to see. And it actually kind of reminded me of what rural life was growing up in Colorado, which, there were slightly bigger homes, and they didn't have dirt floors. But my grandmother grew up in a sod home, which did have a dirt floor. So, I realized that there's just progression of, the ability to, invent and create. But yet that doesn't, having more things does not make you happy. And yes, with the time, when I think about the time of selling our home in 2018 and how much is still in storage, slated to be moved to this cabin here in the next month. But it's a burden to your soul to have to manage things. And I just also realized at this stage in life, I'm really wanting to jettison things. And Kate, said she lives in a trailer, and I've dreamed of an Airstream too. I think that would be a wonderful way to just go off and explore. But I even a car, throwing a few things in the car and taking off on a road trip, that too. I mean, I really am starting to resonate with less things, and yet I'm sentimental. So I have, and as you know, as some of you know, that I last year lost my younger sister, and also my father. And the last of my 3 dogs that I've just, have been part of my adult life also died in that year. And so I have dog tags, I have pictures, I have memorabilia that are treasures to me, and that kind of keep their memories close to me. So, but I know you can lose that too. My husband, I think I told you, had a fire in one of his homes years before me and lost everything. And I think, that we come into this world with nothing, we go out of this world nothing. And so the things that we have, I think we have to really take a moment and realize, do they weigh us down or do they enhance our lives? And so that's kind of what I'm trying to navigate right now, is keep what supports, the dreams and my, what supports me, but let go of all the rest, because it's really meaningless in the whole scheme of things.
Well, thank you for that, Wendy. Very touching, and to hear also of what you've been through this past year, and how that's had you really seriously re-examine as well your priorities and what's important to you in your life. And I'll come back to you a little bit later, but at this point I'd like to invite the others to come back in and ask whatever questions they might have for you, or acknowledgements they might like to give you, and just join the conversation. Yeah, so whoever would like to jump in and just ask or comment or acknowledge Wendy, please go ahead.
I'd love to acknowledge your sharing, your vulnerability, your willingness to expose yourself. Thank you for that. And I feel freed up by that. In fact, I was writing notes to myself for further pondering the notion, and Guiomar, you were bringing this in as well, storage. And on the other hand, the shedding, the jettison, the casting off. And what a wonderful exercise I will do after this conversation to look further at what do I store, literally, metaphorically, psychically.
Oh, I love that.
So thank you for that. And I do have a question for all of us, but I'll step back for the moment.
I actually wanted to acknowledge you, Wendy, for listening to you. You were talking about the boys and stability and just not bringing like any kind of like big transitions into their life, and to be so selfless and to give so much love unconditionally. And I really want to acknowledge that in you, and I actually see it. And it's because, you know, we are love, and to be love, it's really beautiful. And really, I want to acknowledge you for just the purpose that you've played in their life, because, you know, they're going to pay it forward, and it's such a big impact. It's actually bigger than it even seems, you know. But I really wanted to acknowledge that. I don't know if you have any kids of your own. You didn't mention any kids of your own, but yeah, it's really beautiful, because really giving birth is just a vessel. You know, vessels come in different forms. And thank you for just, it's very inspiring.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I always thought I would have children. My first husband, we met when I was 21 and married at 25, and then divorced at 30. And then I was single for a number of years, and kind of really came to a point of acceptance that I thought, okay, this is just my life. And then I was doing well with my business. And so I thought, okay, I don't have to put children through college. I don't have to, you know, pay for weddings. So I ended up buying myself a Porsche, driving around and having fun. But again, another material thing. But then when I met my husband and those 4 boys, and I should say too, my father was an alcoholic. My sister had alcohol problems. My first husband was an alcoholic. My husband's ex-wife was an alcoholic. So there's like that thing commingling. But, you know, I really felt that those boys needed a presence in their life that was strong and supportive. So I really, you know, wanted to give that to them. And I just, you know, having had an alcoholic father, I knew that having an alcoholic parent is a big challenge. So I wanted to try to give them that stability. So thank you for recognizing that.
Wendy, I loved hearing about your childhood and where you grew up. And I loved hearing about I loved hearing all of it. So, and thank you so much for sharing those little insights into your story. And I loved, it felt to me like there was I don't know if it's like a circular, concentric circles, but this from childhood and now with your plans with your cabin, this sense of home being outside of the physical dwelling. And I had this thought of, you know, when we're young, the similarities between your childhood and now what you're hoping to create in Colorado. There's so many similarities there. And I had to think, you know, we spend so much of our growing and adult years sort of leaving home, you know, going to school, university, partnerships, children. And then at some point we realize that we sort of spend so much more of our later years coming back home to ourselves. I just loved that the similarities between your childhood and now, and how they were so similar. You know, we spend a lot of years exploring, and then we come back to what we always knew. And what, you know, I had this vision of you on the trampoline looking up at the stars, and you in the cabin in Colorado doing something similar. And it just, yeah, I just loved that visual image. It was beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, it looks like we lost Wendy. But thank you for sharing with her. I'm not quite sure what happened there. Amanda, I also had that, and I saw Kate and Masima nodding as well around that coming the full circle, and perhaps to where we started, coming back to where we started in the first instance. And I don't think we've got Wendy with us at the moment, but I'll let her in if she comes back. I also wanted to comment, Masima, around what you said, because just around acknowledging Wendy for bringing up the four boys who were, not born through her. And I wondered how that resonates with you around the African culture and of Ubuntu and whatever else it might mean to you. I don't know if you want to comment. You're on mute.
I have a stepdaughter who's actually older than my three girls, so she's 21. So it actually also from the African culture, I quite resonate with that because I grew up with my grandparents. I only started staying with my parents when I was starting school at the age of about 6. So we grew up around community. Things have changed somewhat now because before we used to live in the townships because of Group Areas Act. So community was all in one place, family was all together. But after the Group Areas Act was abolished, people moved to different places. So it's a bit different now. That sense of community is not the same as it was before. But it still exists somewhat, but it's not really the same as it was. And I see it with my kids, and they're always commenting about, it would be so great to be with our cousins. And I grew up with my cousins and all of that. But in the African culture, we take each other in, we raise each other. An aunt is a mother, a grandmother is a mother. There really isn't this whole, you gave birth. And even now there are people who travel for work and have to live outside of the city for work or live in different parts of the world for work. And, in our community, you are raised by whoever is available to raise you, to give you that love. It's not really about the vessel that brought you into the world. So yeah, that's how it is. And I believe that's what community is for me, and we are all in community on this earth. So yeah, that's my contribution to that.
That's beautiful. I just felt that you connected strongly with Wendy, and welcome back, Wendy. I'm sorry we lost you there. We realized you must have lost signal or something.
Yeah, my internet must have gone down because everything just went off, and when I tried to reconnect it, everybody froze, and I'm sorry it froze when Amanda was speaking. So I'm truly sorry to have missed what was said, but hopefully get to see it on the recording.
Oh, wonderful. Yeah, I'll share that with you in due course. And Masima was just giving some reflections on African tradition, the sense of community, and why she resonated so deeply with you around bringing up 4 children who you didn't give birth to, and how grandmothers and mothers in her tradition, in the community that she knew growing up, are given just the same status. It's not about the birth mother, it's about who's there to bring up the children.
I saw Africa in some of the different areas, and I think that's such a beautiful concept. And I do feel that there was some of that growing up where I grew up too, because grandparents, even just neighbors, were part of your upbringing and your life.
Good. Well, thank you, Wendy. I'm glad you're back, that you were able to make it back. And just holding a little bit of awareness around time, we're going to be ending the conversation soon. I'll make some closing remarks, but just before I do that, who have we lost now? Masima. Okay, well, Trish will be back. So if you'd like to give a final few words or sentences or something you'd like to say to Wendy, just in closing.
I have a curiosity. I'm not sure if we have the time for this. I want to acknowledge overall that the thread of home as a sense of peace has been woven throughout this conversation. And I'm curious what my friends here think about what peace is. How does it feel? How do we describe that for others? What does peace mean? I'm wondering if we could perhaps, if that's resonant for anyone, close on that or address that again as a way of being full circle. Because for me, it is so synonymous with feeling at home in every part of my being. It's when I was looking at campers, we looked at all sizes, and then we landed on this little itty bitty trailer because when we walked inside, it just felt right. It felt like a refuge. It felt like peace. It felt like coming home. So I'm curious if others want to build on that or share that with me perhaps another time. And so I say again, thank you, and may we all be in peace and at home.
Thank you, Kate. So if anyone would like to share, go ahead.
Okay, I'd love to share. For me, peace is really just seeing things as they are without any judgment, without any reaction, just accepting things as they are. And it just is really, it's nothing more, no labels, no nothing. That's peace for me.
Okay. Thank you, Massimo. Thank you.
Yes, that resonates with me too, that just allowing and accepting, allowing the flow. Also, I think peace for me is sort of having congruence or integrity, feeling in integrity or in alignment. Like my life, certain aspects of my life mightn't be quite as sometimes I'd like them to be, but at the same time, I can be at peace with that if I think that generally my life is, my external world reflects my internal world. And I think that's so important for me to more and more, is that my internal landscape reflects my external landscape, at least in spirit. So I think that's what's, what's giving me a way to, make decisions too, I think, is that importance of that alignment and congruence. So, yeah.
Thank you, Amanda. And Wendy, is there anything that brings up for you?
Kind of akin to what they've all said. I think it's just that sense of congruence with your own inner knowing and how you come forth in the world. And I think as women, we're often challenged to be more nurturing and supportive and take a back seat to what might really resonate with us. So to be bolder, to be braver, to come forth. And it doesn't have to be aggressive. It can be very soft and vulnerable too, which I think is, shows great strength in many ways. But, that kind of be true to yourself, your own inner integrity, your North Star, whatever that is, we all know it. It's there within us.
That's so beautiful. And I think just in closing, Wendy, to acknowledge you around this, the aspect of peace, really, that I think you bring peace to so many in your steadiness and your steadfastness, and you're always being there and consistent in the way you approach life and you live. And that element of peace for me is around, I think, Amanda, you said how it's not just having to have the outer circumstances necessarily meet what we want or how we'd like life to be, but rather, and I'm putting it in my own words, but rather finding a place from where we can meet it that's in peace with our own being, where we have peace. So it's around having the consciousness around what it is we want and who we are. But Wendy, thank you so much for being here today for this interview. And I'm just delighted that, as Kate said right at the beginning, that this conversation. Hopefully it's created deeper connection between us in this group that are here today, but also in terms of the ripple effect that it carries out into the world. And so thank you to all of you for joining. And just in closing as well, to say that part of why I created this was to, again, foster community and a vision that I have for like-minded women to come together in ways. And being South African, Masima also being South African here, I heard it said actually last week on a hike where Masima and I met, one of the ladies said there are just far too South African voices or podcasts out there. So we'd like to also invite women for us to engage across the continents, across the divides that are there, and find what we have in common, the conversations that we have in common. So there'll be more to come, and you're welcome to engage as my vision sort of evolves. You're welcome to engage to whatever extent you'd like to. So goodbye, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Delightful to be with you all.
Wonderful.
Adieu, goodbye, au revoir.